Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today we've got something really exciting for you. Did you know that it's possible to build an API in Azure using just PowerShell code? Yes, you heard that right. Not only can you create an API, but you can also configure it to fetch data directly from a database. In this tutorial, I'm going to walk you through creating an Azure function that triggers on HTTP requests, retrieves data from a SQL database, and then sends back the results. So, if you're ready to dive into the world of Azure and PowerShell, grab your coffee and let's get started. Just before we dive into the tutorial, I've got a quick reminder for you all. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I'm going to be bringing a lot more content like this your way in the future, and subscribing ensures you won't miss out on any of the action. Whether you're looking to expand your Azure skills, explore more about PowerShell, or just hear about other tips and tricks, we've got you covered. So, make sure you're subscribed, and let's get into creating that Azure function. First up, log into Azure and create a new function app. Quick tip, use the Azure Services filter to find it faster. Next, you'll either add your function app to an existing resource group or create a new one for it. Give your app a unique name, which will be part of your API URL. Choose PowerShell Core as your runtime stack. If you don't have a storage account yet, go ahead and create that too. Click Review and create and wait for it to deploy. Once the deployment is done, click Go to Resource to open the function app settings. To create a new function, click Create Function. This will end up being the URL API path that your API will use. Select Develop in Portal, HTTP trigger, and your path name for the API. For the API to gather some data, we will need a database. You can create an API with static code in the script, or maybe running some other functions, but for this example, we will be using a database. To create a database in Azure, you need a server and a database. The server is used for networking and authentication, among others, and the database is used for storing the data. Choose the resource group you created earlier to put your database in. Give the database a name. If you do not yet have a SQL server, create one and give it a unique name. Make sure to enable SQL and Microsoft authentication, then create a SQL user account. Make sure to save these credentials in a secure place. Select No on Elastic Pools and set the database to development. Very important. Be sure to choose the basic tier, as this is almost free and has very little charges for low workloads. Select Locally Redundant, then Review and Create. Before we go further, you need to make sure that the database is secure so that only you and your function can access it. On the Networking tab of your database server under Public Access, choose Selected Networks. Your public IP should be auto-detected, so choose to allow it. Be aware that if you have a dynamic IP, you may have to update this from time to time to connect to the database. Select Allow Azure Services and Resources to access this server, and remember to save. To connect to your database from a script or from SQL Server Management Studio, you will need the SQL connection string. On the Overview tab of your database, click Show Database Connection Strings. To make this example easier, copy the SQL authentication connection string. You will need this later. Let's connect to the database using SQL Server Management Studio to add some data. You can use the server name, username, and password to connect. Select your database on the top left to ensure that the script creates the table in the correct database. Create a new table with some random data. For this example, we will use a simple users table with a user ID and a username. There is a GitHub link in the description below with all the code. Once the data is created, you can select it and it will be available in the new table. Finally, we can get to the Azure Functions code. To start adding code to your function, open your function from the resource group and under the Functions tab, click your created function. In the Code and Test section, you can see the code to capture the JSON input from the API call, the SQL query that will query the data, and the database connection code. If the results returned any rows, it will get the value of the username column. Otherwise, it will return an error. Ensure that only one row is returned for this to work properly. This block of code returns the result to the client when the API call succeeds or fails. Click Test, enter the JSON to pass the query ahead to the API, and click Run. If all goes well, you will see the username for the user ID with an ID of 1. Azure Functions can be funny and frustrating. Sometimes it may be necessary to restart the Azure function when major code changes are made. Azure Functions works a little differently to normal PowerShell on your desktop. Some modules are not available and has to be built using these .NET classes. If a module is available in the PowerShell gallery, it can normally be added in the requirements PSD1 file in the Files section of the Azure function. To secure the API, you need to authenticate when calling it. You will need the function key for this. Copy this key and save it in a secure location for use in testing. If you don't have Postman, download it and create a new post HTTP call. Add the URL of your Azure function with a /API and / with the name of your function. Add a new header named x-functions-key and paste the key you copied earlier. Just as with the test earlier, build the JSON query with the query ID, which is the user ID, and click send. You should see the same result. And there you go. You have your own PowerShell API now. Expand it, improve it, and play around. Let me know in the comments what you will use your API for or how you can improve on my method. Here is the code that you will find in the GitHub link below that ChatGPT was so gracious to give me. If you found this useful and want to see more content like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. I would really appreciate it.